the Jersey Turnpike, I think. Is the, Well, let me introduce Matthew Barzun. He and his wife Brooke have two Salisbury sons. Jock, who's class of 2021, very proud of him, and Charles, who's a fourth former. And last year they were co-chairs of our sixth form gift, the chapel renovation that'll begin this winter. Matthew's had a remarkable career in the early 90s. He joined a team of three to start up CNET Networks, an American media website that publishes reviews, news, and videos on technology and consumer electronics. He served as National Finance Chair for Barack Obama and as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Kingdom and to Sweden during the Obama presidency. I love the book and I love the stories, and I look forward to hearing from you, Matthew, so thanks for joining us, and the crowd is yours.
When I get a lovely introduction like that, I usually say, I wish my mom were here. And she's here. Thanks for coming, Mom. Thank you all. I was hoping we could do it. My mom and my lovely wife are both therapists, so I'm very comfortable with like the group therapy. We're kind of in, right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so we just kind of pull it in. I'm hoping we just have a discussion. This is the first time I've been with real people face to face talking about the book. They're all Zoom all the time. That's nice, isn't it? Yeah. Someone come up here.
Here you go, man.
Welcome, Mom.
Here, let's sit right next to the guy.
Yeah, please.
He didn't put that out.
Where did Mandy go?
I'm ready to camera.
You're ready?
Not really, but
You gotta join our circle.
okay, I'm here. Oh, it's doing your circle. Okay.
But how do the book clubs normally work?
Yeah, just like this. Yeah. Just like this. Fewer people.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're thrilled to have Matthew. This is actually the first book club since I've been here where the author is present to talk
Does that
about
make it more awkward?
No, because I know you. I feel like it's we're good. So just to get things started, like just general thoughts in terms of, have you read many books on leadership before, or is this kind of a new type of read for you, or what were some takeaways and just general thoughts on it?
As a servant leader.
Okay.
So yeah, we read some leadership books.
Okay.
It was a good book. Well, an easy read, and I'll be honest, I did the audiobook. And having the author read the audiobook is always such a delight. And you read your book very well.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's an amazing man who I never got to meet face to face, but it was a very intimate relationship because he was in my ears for what turned out to be 5 days. You go into a recording studio, and I love music, and I'm not remotely musical. So I got to go into this cool, time stopped in 1975, downtown Louisville, Doobie Brothers posters on the wall, 8-track tapes, and this cool sound booth. And I put on the big cans, you don't call them earphones, the cans. And then this other guy from New Jersey who does audiobooks for a living. So he reads them, like vampire fiction. And then when he's not reading vampire fiction, he's directing people like me who've never done it before. It was really fun. And so I show up and I blocked 2 full days. And it started at 9 o'clock. And we start going, and it's 10:15. And then he said, okay, great, Matthew, I'll see you tomorrow. And I was like, no, Scott, I have all day booked, I'm ready. He's like, you may be ready, but your voice is not. Okay. And he said he can hear it. He's like, you can't tell with yourself. He's like, you start straining more to say the words, and all the meaning gets lost. And as a listener, you can hear it in an instant, and it's really jarring. So I basically did an hour and 20 minutes, 5 days in a row, as opposed to cramming it all in one day.
In terms of structuring the book, is it something where the structure just seemed really obvious to you, or when you were coming together, I'm always amazed when how authors decide the best way to put it together and how they're writing it. What was your process like? studying how you present the material and how you, was there a type of book you were emulating in some way or other books?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never done it before. And I wrote 2 books that never saw the light of, I mean, just sort of, as Brooke knows. I mean, I wrote one, not really almost all the way, like, and then I was like, I threw it out. I was like, whoa. It was, I'd written it in the last 6 months of my time in London, and Brooke and our kids had moved home early, and so I had this time away, which was difficult, more difficult for Brooke and the kids than for me. And so I used the extra time to try to write something I thought was pretty clever and good. And then I would just do it at night, and then I came home, printed it out, and sat down and read it. And it was just the tone was awful and sort of smug, and I just was like, I can't believe. So I threw that out, started another one. Didn't. So this was kind of the third effort.
Okay.
And it was twice as thick. And the one thing, when you're in the airport, back when we used to fly more than we do now, I love that size. Because you just look at it and you're like, I could do that in one sitting, and maybe it takes 2.
Yeah.
But I was determined not to have it be one of those thick ones that like later. One day, which is kind of never.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the structure, as I said, I'm a frustrated non-musician. And I would watch lots of Netflix. And so Netflix things usually have 8, 9, 10 episodes kind of thing. And then albums, 7 or 8 songs. And evidently the third song I learned from someone, if you look at one of your favorite albums, the third song is the one they think is going to be the most important. And so I did, so that was sort of slightly in the background. So this is basic, I wish this were an album.
It's the third chapter.
Well, so the third chapter is about my favorite, like the matron saint of this book, this amazing woman, Mary Parker Follett, who no one's ever heard. I mean, sort of, and she's the one, for those of you who haven't read it, I mean, Harvard Business School asks 200 business gurus around the world, this is 20 years ago, who's your guru? And they proudly published the Guru's Gurus list. Peter Drucker's number 1, which wasn't a big surprise, probably the most quoted leadership thinker of the last century. And then I'm digging into him, and I had this rule, self-imposed, that I couldn't quote more than 3 dead white guys in any one chapter. And one day I will be one, so there's nothing against dead white guys. But I just sort of felt like I was way overweighted on that side. So I'm on Wikipedia, just cruising around, reading about Peter Drucker. And then on Wikipedia, it leads to this article, and I read the article, and he admits at the end of his life that he had a guru all along. Mary Parker Follett, who was a gay woman from Boston, 1868 to 1933. And she doesn't show up, she's not even on the list of the guru's gurus, except she's the amazing person. So she's chapter 3.
That was the best part of the book, I thought. I really enjoyed that chapter, just being introduced to her. And I asked my daughter went to school in Milton Academy, and
Right
this
there.
woman is born in Quincy.
Yeah.
And I always went to the Airbnbs in Quincy because they had a beautiful beach and nice little restaurant and stuff, and huge immigrant community. So I asked her if she knew about it. She didn't get back to me, so I'm suspecting that she never knew it. And you would think, hey, Milton is there, they should have a big thing about this woman on the campus and stuff.
I'm glad your children don't get back to you either. They all share that.
I talked about the trip back home to Iran. I'm going in February. She's like, well, I'm the capital. I'm going with you, but so I guess I'm assuming she didn't know about that lady because she would have sent me.
No, I think she's really, this woman named Joan Tong wrote a great biography of her, which is thick and great, but that's it. And so every 20 years or so, people are like, oh, she ought to be appreciated again, and then she isn't. So I'm hoping that she'll be better known. There's an amazing Harvard professor named Amy Edmondson who I had a chance to do a podcast with, and she, of course, knew all about Mary Follett. And I said, well, why isn't she more famous? Or not famous, but well known. And she said, well, I think huge sexism at the time and still, but in addition to that, it's that she was such a clear writer. She just said what she felt, and she's a beautiful writer. And so it doesn't lend itself to graduate students interpreting and reinterpreting, because you can just read her and she says what she says. And so there isn't a little cottage industry within academia interpreting Mary Follett. She said that sometimes makes you less well known.
So what was your inspiration for writing a book on leadership?
Thank you again for all being here and getting questions like this. It's strange to me that I use the word power twice in the title, because it's a word that I avoided using when I was doing .com stuff out of San Francisco. I avoided it in presidential politics, and I certainly avoided it as a diplomat, just because I think it's so loaded. And I'm curious if that's true with you all. I mean, if you just had to free associate with the word power, I think there are positive things in there, but there's a lot of negative ones. So I was reluctant to use it. I would sort of use words like energy, which I probably got from my mom, which I think is a really good term, but that turns other people off, and it's kind of a loaded word of its own. So I stuck with power. And I didn't think it was a leadership program. I would never call it that. But the publisher said, look, we have to stick you in a box. And I know that's annoying, and you can like complain for 30 minutes. And then he very smartly, he's like, all the musicians complain. I was like, oh yeah. They complain, but like, hey, if you think, and then as a fan, I was like, oh, it is helpful. Like, this is jazz, this is country, even though musicians whistle at that, it's like, hey, you gotta start in some box. And so leadership is the one that they chose. I wouldn't have, just because that word's pretty loaded. I mean, so many people I respect, look up to, I'm inspired by, would never self-identify as a leader. And that word is so sort of, that awful tone, which I talk about in the book, which I have become allergic to, which is the often wrong, never in doubt tone of voice that men and women adopt. Men are particularly good at it, I think, in the bad sense, of pretending they know much more than they do and saying it perfectly. But that didn't really answer your question. So I felt in the course of my life thus far, I had really seen this pattern of behavior that I thought was so destructive to people's energy, to people's initiative, and you could just see it, and I felt like really sensitized to it, probably early on, but certainly as my life went on. And I would just see wherever people were gathered, that human energy was either on the good side, sort of created, kindled, but much more often killed, just all the time, by people who I knew were good people and were trying to get things done. And so I really became, it used to be called, the book was called on my whiteboard for a long time and in my head, the pyramid versus the, and then I just had a question, like something else. Because it really was this pyramid perspective of up and down, ranking, rating, sorting, sifting, winning, losing, that I was getting so aware of and allergic to. And I was like, there has to be an alternative to this pyramid perspective. I just didn't have a name for it. And then reading Mary Parker Follett, and then one day I was just staring at the back of a $1 bill, looking at the strange, or on the front of my U.S. passport, that strange thing about the eagle's head. Okay, so I know, it was the pyramid versus the, I don't know what. Then it was the pyramid versus the snowflake. The snowflake became a loaded term in our, so I couldn't say that, even though I think it's a beautiful word and concept. Then it was pyramid versus the fuzzball, which was just my place of, like, I had to have something. And then I'm looking at the back of the dollar bill and said, that thing looks like a fuzzball. And I have bad eyesight, so then I pull out my glasses. I was like, what is that? I go back to Wikipedia, and then I learn the story of the constellation, which is, you know, for those of you who haven't read, I mean, this thing we look through all the time. But that's how we're supposed to think of as Americans. E pluribus unum, from many one. We're supposed to be from many stars, one constellation. And so often I think we treat it like from many bricks, one pyramid, where you either fit in or you are left out.
Can you elaborate on the constellation concept? Because I love that analogy, but like, can you just like, what exactly, is it that there's a pattern of equality or a pattern that makes a beautiful design or like?
Yeah, it's the, and this is the hardest part of, because the editor was it's sort of like, hey, look, it's a neat thing. It's on the back of the U.S. dollar bill. It's in our national seal. She wanted to get rid of the whole first plate. She's like, I think the book is really interesting. It has nothing to do with that. And I was like, oh, no. We have to have these images. Later, a reader told me, and I wish I'd known this at the time, because it would have been on the very first page of the book. Aristotle said, way back, the soul never thinks without an image. Soul never thinks without an image. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I didn't know he said that, but we so often have an image in our heads. And if you're at any fundraising meeting, and with me, with Peter, with any, we've all been on them as volunteers, usually the first thing to do is people go write a pyramid and just draw a big triangle. And they're like, we're going to talk to a super wealthy person, and then 3 pretty wealthy, and then, they keep going down the pyramid, and then at the bottom of the pyramid, and then we'll do friends of the library or friends of the museum. And it's always lame. And they wonder why there's no energy by the time you get there. And so I've always been aware that pyramid is a shape. So the constellation was chosen, and it took longer to design that logo than more independence. When George Washington gets elected president, he picks to name the first 5 Navy frigates, and he's not fanciful. He doesn't name them after, ancient Greeks like Aristotle. He doesn't name them after abstract concepts like courage and independence or whatever. He names them the USS United States. He's kind of on the nose. USS United States, USS Constitution, USS Congress, USS President, and USS Constellation. So it was a tangible thing for those folks back then, for all their faults and all their prophecy in that. And so what I love about the Constellation, what they thought was you could be totally independent, right? And they had just become independent, and then choose to become interdependent and make connections between other stars to make something more big, more useful than you ever could have loved. And you could add new stars and come up with new configurations between them. And so that's the basic thing. That it is the symbol for interdependence, and the pyramid is a symbol for dependence. Hoarding power and lording it over others, and this was how you can be free with and through one another, is what I loved about it. And then when you start kind of getting into it, which I don't get into in the book, but it's like, if someone shows you Orion's belt, I mean, we were probably all shown that. Thank you, Mom, you probably showed it to me. It is not at all self-evident. Once you're shown it, you can never unsee it. But the lines aren't there. Oh, and by the way, someone else and other cultures do. They don't call it Orion's belt. They don't configure those stars that way at all. And so that's fine. So I think it's a really powerful image, because what we're up against, what I think we're up against, looking around at the world, is that, too often we're saying you either fit in or you are left out. And the Constellation lets you stand out as yourself and fit in. Stand out and fit in. I think about the boys here. Like, what a powerful thing. And in fact, when I was in London, I went around and I went to 200 high schools and did that thing that you read about. So 20,000, I did a workshop with 20,000 kids and asked them what's their biggest frustration, what's their biggest hope about America, even though they're British. And then I kept it going back home in Kentucky, not at that scale, and in southern Indiana. And what I learned from American teenagers, number one fear is division, racial, economic, and social. And then they flip over the little index card, and then they write the one word that gave them inspiration was diversity. Mm-hmm. So you got diversity and division. They both have div in them. So what they love most and fear most has to do with separateness. So they want to be separate, they want to be their true selves and their whole selves, and they don't want to be alienated and cut off from everybody else. So how can you be a star and look at other people as stars and make connections between them? So that's what they want me to answer.
No, it's very helpful that as a star you can shine, but
Yeah.
you can also be a part of a pattern, and it can
Yeah.
be different patterns depending on how you look at it from different cultures or different
Yeah.
perspectives. And like I was trying to like create the image of the constellation, and I was having a hard time doing that because I was trying to find something tangible, but I think you just explained that it's actually the interdependence with and through, where you can be your own individual but also
Yeah.
be part of something, and I think that's beautiful.
I had all these doodles that were going to be in there, and they're just like, I'm out. But you're going to lose people. So I want to write another book, and so thank you for challenging me.
Matthew, I was just going to say one quick thing about constellation, which to me is such a beautiful metaphor. In a simple way, there's a place for everyone.
Yeah.
And that is something I think we're all thinking about a lot these days.
Yeah.
And I think I, for a number of reasons, have become familiar with some artists that are dealing with constellations in their imagery.
Ooh.
And some of that is very beautifully, powerfully about interdependence and separateness and loneliness. And so I think.
Ooh, I love this all about. Yeah, and I think on the Zoom circuit recently, what I discovered, there's sort of oversimplifying it, 3 types of readers. There's some that are just like, yeah, look, I mean, it's neat to have a word like constellation, but this is how I've been living my life anyway. That's kind of interesting. Then there's a group, it's like, I've done pretty well on the pyramid. I've just started to see the limits and the load that it imposes on my team or on myself, and I'm open for a new way of thinking. And then there's the third group of just like, I'm really comfortable in the pyramid, I'm doing really well, and they're a really fun group because they really don't like, I mean, it might be nice to say that, but they don't like the book, and they just don't, and it's great, and if you push them gently a little bit, like, okay, tell me more. Basically, they're like, the pyramid provides order and stability. And then it's like, absolutely it does. It's not the only kind of order and stability, which is where the constellation comes in. But what they really think is if you leave the pyramid, you are either signing up for anarchy or communism. And so anarchy is just sort of like a zillion stars in the night sky we stick with. And just like, everyone's on their own, good luck. Or the other fear of like, you just want us to be one giant collective, the sun or something. We all get lost into the crowd. And the constellation is like, no, neither of those things. It's individuals in these distinct groups.
One question I had, Matthew, was you give great examples from the past of people who either helped create this constellation thinking or embodied it, and then you talk, about Obama at the end. I was just wondering, other people that kind of are people that emulate in terms of constellation thinking and team building, and maybe in other facets, like you're mentioning the art world, like other examples that are out there kind of in contemporary life that you see as kind of guiding in that way.
Well, I mean, I wrote a little bit about it. I don't know that much about it, but Brooke and I have a great friend whose life has been, like millions of others, transformed by AA or Narcotics Anonymous or anything like that. And I was watching this great frontline show about Iran and the fact called Our Man in Tehran, about the New York Times columnist who's over there. And he has this amazing scene where he's in the basement, there's a working basement of a mosque in Tehran, bless you, where, the government around is printing the AA book and distributing it in mosques. Not because, think of all the reasons they wouldn't want to do that, right? A big long list of American books that are banned and wrong, alcohol, not legal in the country, and they are distributing it because it works so well. And the 12 steps, I think, are known to men, even if we don't know all 12, we've had enough friends or culturally. But from talking to friends in that, it's the 12 principles, which is how a group is supposed to behave as a group, and how groups are supposed to deal with other groups, that enables it to grow and spread and stay vibrant for over, coming up on 100 years. So that I think is something I want to learn more about. But I try to stay away from the politics. Is so loaded. And even trying to talk about Obama, who's obviously a big inspiration to me and millions of others. At one point, they were sort of like, don't make it, you could make it like a political book. I really don't want to do that because I think you're just going to turn off half of America, and I don't want to do that. So we try to keep them in a little bit. I don't know, are there any that you, as you look around?
Well, I was wondering in terms of, we have a big group here, if y'all know of other people that when you were reading or just in this course of this conversation that embody that constellation mindset and how they approach problems or teamwork or things like that.
I work in consulting, and I think we operate that way.
Okay.
Obviously, we have pyramid structure, we have CEOs and senior management, but in actual engagement of a project, it's a constellation model, really. You have junior people that just coming out of college and be super brilliant, and you have other people very experienced, and we're all gelling to create a service for a client. So I think that applies there. I see it very much so in that application.
I mean, my dad's a lawyer, my brother's a law professor, so I'm lawyer adjacent and law adjacent. My observation from the outside of law firms are interesting, not quite in the cool way that consultants, because you have clients, but when someone is named the new managing partner of blank, blank, and blank law firm, my sense is the picture we think in our heads isn't, oh, they're top of the pyramid, they're the boss of all these other lawyers. They're kind of first among equals, they're also a lawyer, they also have their practice, they're taking on administrative duties more. I've gotten involved in our local university, University of Louisville, and a lot of what I heard from the deans, I did a big session with all the deans and our wonderful president there. And I'm like, gosh, universities ought to be more constellation if you look at them. And really they're not. And they get very not constellation.
The creative energy gets lost.
Yeah.
And you see it in different cultures, like we travel and obviously we see different organizations with different clients, but you can see the pyramid structure. There's lack of creativity. But when you have this constellation, there's a lot of creativity, and that's where, when you see it in Silicon Valley, that's how they operate as well too.
But I was thinking of an organization like Google, which at least traditionally prided itself on being a constellation of innovation with very little hierarchy.
Yeah, I know, and I used to live out there, and I think it's true. I think a lot of these ones started out that way, certainly the one I was part of. It is amazing how quickly you can calcify into a pyramid.
What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's like you start going public is creates a lot of wealth, does a lot of other things, but you, certainly in the case of the company I did, you just start, it makes so much sense, which we all do it and we're good at it. It's like, but you set a goal, so in this case, like, and everyone's encouraging you to like, what do you think earnings are gonna be like next quarter? And then everything that flows from that. And then you get rewarded when it comes in at or near, it can't be too far above. And you wonder why people get in trouble with financial engineering. I mean, it's like the whole system is begging for it. And so then you start working backwards from what you want. And that phrase, I think, is really telling, working backwards, which we're all good at. And I think if you look at it in this other way, like that is a backwards way of working. And it's usually not the way that led to this sort of, if you have to be overly simplistic, it's like most internet companies embraced uncertainty at the outset. And then they started getting into the certainty business, and that starts to close off and start a whole new pattern of behavior, trying to factor out uncertainty and manage to what, and not just to pick on what, manage to those growth targets. And then the weird thing of like, I cut this from the, for good reason probably, but there was a story, my mom was raising one. I think I'm going to stop.
Anyway, in your podcast, you did remind a learner he spoke about having tried to use that for common week. So I thought you could take that as a positive example.
Trying to use,
Constellation.
oh, yeah. And so and fascinating conversation with Michael, thank you for setting that up. It was funny is all the ways that people will like, we got into this discussion about, oh, well, I tried delegating once and that didn't work. I was like, I'm not advocating, like Constellation, the problem with delegating is it's like washing your hands of it. It's to your point on Constellation, you wouldn't in an engagement with a big client be like, okay, junior people, your turn. Like, you're just abdicating your responsibilities. Like, you can't leave the table. You have to, this is my purpose, you gotta stay at the table and work through this. And I think the most powerful thing any leader can do around any table, which is really hard to say, which is whatever topic. I don't know what we should do. Maybe we might, right? And you think back to Afghanistan, to get cheery Friday afternoon. But I imagine, and I ran this by a senior retired general the other day, and it rang true to him, which is George W. Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. The following meeting happened, if you squint, in all four presidencies, where they're gathered in a situation room, and each of the presidents and their team says to the leading military and civilian leaders of the Pentagon, go across the river, come up with options for me, and then come back and we'll pick them. And I was like, the minute that was said, it was doomed to fail. Because once you go across the river, then you start working with your smart team, junior, senior, and you pull together a plan, and whenever you pull together options, you have a favorite. Then you know you have to go back across the river. And by the way, while you're working, they also have a favorite. You just haven't talked about it honestly with each other. But they have a sense of what your favorite is. You have a sense of what their favorite is. So then you start linking it to the Washington Post so that they have less wiggle room when they come back. Mm-hmm. Then you have that awkward meeting when you get back together. They're trying to sell you on option B. You're trying to steer them to option C, and it's winning and losing, and we end up where we did, as opposed to the awkward, difficult, like, I don't know how, I mean, it's incredibly complicated. What should we do? And it isn't purely military. This is what's so frustrating. It's like, of course, we're in a democracy. It's okay to talk about politics in the context of war in the democracy. Maybe not afraid of crass politics, but like you're just kidding yourself if you don't factor that in at the beginning with all those smart people sitting at the table.
What about the context of family relationships? As a parent, I often feel I don't know.
Well,
Our
daughter, who is the only member of family who didn't go to Salisbury, for obvious reasons, Eleanor, she's amazing. So this book comes in, and the prototype, like I get an advanced copy of it, and it's sitting there on the kitchen table. And so the tagline is how the subtitle is how the best leader is going to let go. And she just looks at it, she goes, ha! And she didn't have to say anything. And I do think, I was asked on Michael's podcast, he's like, well, what element of your life have you found this the hardest to put into practice? And easy answer, parenting. I mean, absolutely, I think our generation, well, I'll have to put it on all of you, it is really hard to let go as a parent. And I looked at my mom, I mean, like, I was raised, I don't know if this is true of other people, I'm great friends with your daughter, we were given an unbelievable amount of leeway. And to my best, we didn't complain. So the fact that we have all chosen as parents to give so much less wiggle room to our children, even though we didn't resent or we don't obviously resent the wiggle room we were given, baffles me. And I don't, so that is something I need to, do you have any?
I wouldn't want you to think that I've learned how to let go.
Oh, really?
Well, let's just say, one keeps looking.
I've seen this in education here in Salisbury, actually, with project-based learning. Shift towards that, where, your dogs are searching for something.
Oh,
and so they're in the library a lot, And I've seen, Rowan where he kind of lets the students take the lead on these projects. And some of that's like, I don't know anything about this. It's your responsibility to go figure this out. We'll work together.
Yeah.
And so I kind of see this every day in classes like that. And it's an exciting thing. The teachers are excited, the students are excited. It's not a pyramid where the inspiration is coming from the teacher down to the students.
Yeah.
It's everybody working together and feeding off each other's energy and creating something.
Totally, and I think the challenge, the problem with it, and this is why I love the word constellation, just because it's different and new, because these words that should be such great words, like collaboration, and what a great word. It has been, I think, so dull by like awful software. Like collaboration software and bad corporate initiatives over the last 30 years that is just like, it's code for a bad middle school science project. One kid does all the work, everyone else free rides. Or teacher just gets sort of a day off while the kids figure it out. But it's a playground for sloppy thinking and bad ideas. That's the downside, right? And I think we just have to acknowledge that. Like, if you say that in a room full of parents, it will be met with lots of folded arms. Like, I don't think so. But if you do it the way you just described it, the way I've seen it work through our kids, it is magic in the good sense of magic, which is, but the teacher hasn't let it, and so that's what's misleading. It's like you let go, not in a delegating wash your hands of, it's like you let go of thinking you have all the answers, but you're deeply engaged and involved. And so you give away power so that you get it back again, so that you give it away again, you get it back. So I'm excited to see how that grows here. Mom?
Just a follow-up, if you could describe what you say in the book about follow-up going to a meeting and what she felt was important about.
Oh, right, yeah, so she says, so she's writing 100 years ago, America's coming out of a pandemic, global pandemic, racial, social, economic division everywhere she looks, huge debates about overreach of big business getting way too powerful, equally big debates about government overreaching, getting in, trying to mess up big business. Sounds kind of familiar. And she's like, all of that can seem really daunting, except we can do something about it effective at your next Monday morning meeting. And she's like, there's only one good outcome, 4 possible outcomes of a meeting, and only one of them is worthwhile. And thank you, Rick, because I think this is, so bad outcome number 1, you try to win the meeting. We all know what this is like. It's like, why did you even invite other people? Bad outcome number 2 is the flip of that, and you're just like, I don't know, Peter or Mimi, they seem super fired up. Let them have their way. That's no good. You're depriving the group of a unique perspective, your own. Third bad outcome, which we were all trained to shoot for, which is compromise. And she's like, I don't think so. She's like, the problem with compromise is like, at best you just leave with a partial win and a partial loss. She said the only reason, and I'll circle back to a great, very simple analogy or story she used to bring that why compromise is good. The only reason you should ever gather around the table with other human beings is to co-create something. And just make something together. Now it could be make a cool project like in the art building here. It could be make a project in project-based learning. It could just be make a determination. It could be make a product roadmap. It really doesn't matter. But if you make something with a group, this magic thing happens where you were forever part of that thing you made. It's forever part of you. You didn't lose yourself. You didn't give up your individuality. You got more you for having made it. And so did everybody else. And I think that's really powerful because you can then bring these 3 expectations into every gathering, classroom, boardroom, dining room, to your family question. 3 expectations. 1, expect to be needed, so bring your whole self. 2, expect to need other people. That's why you're in a meeting, in a family. 3, and most importantly, expect to be changed. And that to me, especially in our modern politics that we're all going through now, that third one, expect to be changed, means that if you can only be changed if you've made something with that food. So that the next time you go to a meeting, when you bring your whole self, it's a slightly enhanced self based on what you did the meeting before, or else you keep bringing that same stagnant self to every meeting. And that to me at any scale, in any of those rooms we're talking about, is the big lesson I take from her. And her great thing just on why compromise is bad, it's not in the book. They didn't think anyone would understand it, and I totally tried. It's about, so it's about 800 years ago, so that's important. When people were getting their houses electrified in places like that, they have these places, it's kind of a good setup. And so she describes this meeting where a woman, so she wasn't married then, she and her life partner, Isabel, had a little house in Vermont. And the electrician would come, and this was new, so like, we're gonna get our, we're making the investment, we're gonna get it electrified. So she had this idea of how it would look. So the guy comes over and she says it, and he's like, absolutely not, your house will burn down. She's like, well, what's your suggestion? And so he knows how to he's like, it should look like this. And she's like, not gonna happen. I will not live in a house that you have electrified that way. And she said, imagine they compromise. Do half her plan, half his plan. Half her house burns down, half the house is unlivable. She's like, this happened, this sort of miracle of co-creation happens every single day and we all know it. It's not some big complicated thing. But don't settle for compromise. You just start to work through. It's like, well, that's not the only way, he says. And she's like, well, it's not the only way, what if? And then they start to sort of look around, and lo and behold, they come up with a plan that she can live with, and they'll burn the house down, and we'll pass his code. And so that was sort of this mundane, sort of homey, and I think good lesson of like, we can all do that.
Hi. I really appreciated several anecdotes that you shared, some of which you talked about today. But my personal favorite was about Lynn Twist and her encounter with the tribal chief. And specifically because of the exchange and the very phrase, if you are here to help, please leave. If you are here because your liberation is bound up with ours, please stay. That to me was, I mean, no offense to the 200 pages, that to me was worth everything, because I think it really speaks to those.
Isn't it amazing?
It's such a beautiful statement.
Yeah. And she is this is Lynn Twist, and so the story is, and she said this in Louisville, she came for a talk, and you know how you've heard those stories where people like spend their whole life on like the bond trading desk, and then there's like, I can't do this anymore, and then they go out to save the world or something. And she's like a weird, wonderful twist on that, which is she starts the first half of her career raising money to solve world hunger. Then she has an epiphany, but she doesn't go to trade bonds. She goes to save the rainforest. And so at this point in her life, she hasn't made the rainforest connections, but she has this great friend who does, and she does a 4-day trek to the headwaters of the Amazon, to this tribe that had said no to all involvement with the outside world, but the deforestation was coming to them, so they were desperate. So she makes her pitch to the tribal chief through a translator, and she's really good at doing that sort of thing, so she's very good at it. And then he says that line, he's like, I think I understand what you're saying, if you're here to help, please leave. She's nervous, I blew it, And then he goes on, but if you're here because you think your liberation is inexorably tied up with our liberation, stay, let's see if we can work it out. And once I heard that, I mean, that to me is the essence of the whole thing too, because what we're tricked into thinking is you can be selfish, we all understand what that is. And if the opposite of selfish is being selfless. And it's like, no. It's sort of like the opposite of the pyramid is anarchy. It's like, no, there's this other thing. And this other thing is mutual liberation. Now that term is loaded politically. So another way to think about that isn't in the book is 2 cars in a parking lot in America. You have to guess the Democrat car and the Republican car. You're all going to get this right. And I'm not going to make it easy. It's not a red Ford F-150 and a blue Prius. Right? These are identical like, white Honda Civics. They each have one bumper sticker and one word on it. Car number 1 says freedom. Car number 2 says together. Yeah, so we all get that. So freedom is Republican, together is Democrat. And in my adult lifetime, I think our adult lifetimes, we have seen both those words taken to an extreme. So I'll take the freedom one first. Freedom has become, layer COVID on top of it. Freedom from, leave me the heck alone. Just pure freedom from interference, from government, from other. Together has been taken to its extreme of total togetherness. One Democratic candidate's bumper sticker was, not me, us. So give up your individuality for the collective. In the COVID context, it's kind of, you talk about herd immunity as if we're all herds of cattle, right? And so what I think we want, and what Lynn Twist's story gets at, put another way, is what we desperately need and want is freedom together. Not freedom from one another, freedom with and through one another. And taking it back to the founding, it's the best idea America has ever had. And we fell short of it then, we fall short of it now. But this idea, any band of revolutionaries can declare independence. And they do it all the time. Every year, just look at what country has declared independence. That was not what was so amazing about what happened in America. Right? It was like, how can we figure out how to be free with and through one another? And again, they gave us a symbol, and they gave us a motto, and hypocritically and tragically fell short then, but we ought to keep aiming for it. How can we be free together? And I think COVID is a really powerful way. Like, you will not get it being totally free from, and we will not get it treating one another like herds of cattle. We have to be fully free and choosing to be free together. Or else it'll be total selfishness or the equally bad things that happen when everyone's trying to be selfless, which sounds better, but it leads to just as bad outcomes.
Looking for a pause to just mention that little sentence about Iran and many American folks and authors. I'm just being an Iranian, I'm sensitive to it, maybe I'm nitpicking, but I would put it as the Islamic government of Iran, or because it's not like Iran, we don't recognize, most Iranians don't recognize the government as.
No, I said government of Iran. Right. Yeah. No, I was, I mean, as a former gentleman, and thank you for saying that, I'm always quick to say not the Iranian people, but
I'm just nitpicking.
the regime in
I'm very
Iran.
sensitive to
Yes, thank you.
the Islamic government being separate from Iran, Iranians.
Very good point, and I'm sorry if I wasn't
No,
clear on that.
that's it.
Dan Brown is one of on the government of Iran's not okay list. Speaking of the back of the dollar bill.
And the twist part is also one of my favorite parts of the book, but I also love it when you tackle what is the special relationship, where you actually have to break down and decipher what we mean when we talk about special relationship between the UK and the US. And you talk about that a lot, like language, like power, like all these words are loaded and they signify different things to different people, and like what does it actually mean to define something like that? I just wonder if you could speak more to that, because that was another favorite moment. I thought was really
Oh, thank you. This is one where I had to do a little doodle in the book.
Yeah.
So it's hard here because it's a visual thing to me. So the word special relationship, everyone either rolls their eyes or nods their head. So nobody's thinking. They either sort of like it or hate it. And I was like, again, guided by therapy and couples therapy. If you're bumping it against something, it's like you unpack it, right? That's like a good therapeutic word. So let's unpack that phrase. But if you talk too therapeutically, so then I wanted to steal the language of management consulting, which is a 2x2 grid, which evidently Boston, are you BCG?
No.
Okay. Evidently they claim they invented it. Anyway, a 2x2 thing, so you have north, south, east, west, whatever. So you have to picture this. There's special, and then it's like, what's the opposite of special? Just for this little word game. It's like, well, let's say routine. Special is sort of unique and routine is not unique. And then what's the opposite of relationship? Transaction. Relationships are about people, transactions are about things. So I just sort of did that on my notebook. And I was like, okay, so special relationship. And then if you look at those quadrants about routine relationships, and special transactions. So that is the part of office life or bureaucratic life that is just the worst. It's what all the funny movies making fun of companies all pick on that. And to me, if you have to bring routine relationships when you're getting off an airline flight, and the nice flight attendant says, "Thank you so much for coming, thank you so much for coming, thank you." And you're 10 deep, right? So you just hear this person say that, and it's just like, why don't, this is why Southwest makes fun of it and does so well. Just make a video. Like, why do you have a human being saying something over and over again with no real connection? And then, so that's a sort of routine relationship. And then a special transaction is when you go to the doctor's office and they hand you the dreaded clipboard and you have to fill out all that information and you're just like, aren't I in the system? Do you know what I mean? And you actually want to be. So what we do is, and technology helps us, we try to move everything into that quadrant which is routine transaction. Right? And it's just like, oh, you'd love to be pre-screened or just, and I think we seek out a world with no friction. Because those other worlds I described are frustrating friction. So just make everything, like automate and replicate everything. And we've done that. So you can wish anyone in your network a happy birthday without even trying. And what does it feel like when you get what you know is an automated, my birthday is tomorrow, by the way, so I will get a whole bunch of not real happy birthdays. And it's just like, Then if you got a real text from someone like 2 days late, Matthew, I'm so sorry, I forgot your birthday, I feel terrible. It's like, oh. Like it's real, it's a real connection, I really forgot, they felt bad, they did it. And so what I think we need to do is move our, so friction-free feels good, but there's a cost and a catch to it. No energy lives there, no potential power lives there. So if you go to the upper right-hand quadrant of this thing I'm not drawing for you, special relationship, friction lives there, but it's fruitful friction. And back to your question about family, the way I try to bring this to life in the book is friction-free. If you go into like a family with school-age children on a Tuesday morning, that to me is kind of friction, like everyone knows their part and people barely talk to one another. And weirdly, when I grew up in this little town, I would go ski this other family's breakfast because my sister and I would walk to school and we'd pick up her best friend on the way to school. And she was always late and we were always on time. And so I would just watch this other family have breakfast for like 4 minutes, which is kind of a long time as a 10-year-old. And I would watch, I had 5 kids and I had 2 big yellow labs, and I just would watch. And no one ever spoke. Just like, make the coffee, make the toast, make the sandwiches. It's like, it was like this ballet. And they were a loving family and a great family. And so was ours. But then you think about the family dinner. So the family dinner is like, this is when like tears happen. People laugh, they cry. That is the land of fruitful friction. People storm off in a hug. You don't storm out of your family garden. You just sort of get through it. So then I thought about it, well, they need each other. So if you picture this shape that's sort of like an infinity again between fruitful friction and friction free, if you get it right, it creates what I call a bloom loop. Of like, you have your family dinners, which earns you the right to have friction-free breakfast, which earns you the right to have intense family dinners. And it's like, that's kind of the good flow. And a team or a classroom could be like that, or a high-functioning management consulting team with the client and the junior people and everything probably gets that good flow. But you can't dodge the friction part. You have to not be afraid of it and seek it out.
I have to excuse myself for,
I think we're out of
I have a chairman conference call. I hope I can
Oh
bring
my
it.
gosh. Thank you so much.